Hi everyone, there comes a point in your life where you wake up one morning and realize you've spent so much time trying to be what everyone else needed that you've completely forgotten who you are. You've said yes when your heart whispered no. You've stayed when your soul begged you to leave. You've kept giving, hoping that one day someone would finally give you the same love back. But instead, you end up empty, and you start wondering, when did I stop choosing me? We grow up believing that love means sacrifice, that if we give more, understand more, tolerate more, somehow will be enough. But there's a quiet tragedy in that way of living, because while you're busy loving everyone else, no one notices you're breaking inside. We live in a world that constantly tells us that love means giving your time, your energy, your patience, your forgiveness. We are taught to show up for others, to be understanding, to be kind, to keep the peace even when we're breaking inside. And for a while, it feels noble. It feels right. You convince yourself that being selfless is the highest form of love. You tell yourself that maybe if you give enough, one day, someone will give you that same kind of love in return. But somewhere along the way, something starts to feel off. You notice that your smile feels forced, your laughter doesn't come as easily, and that the version of you who once felt alive has slowly faded into the background. Choosing others over yourself can feel like love, but it's often self-abandonment wearing a pretty disguise. Every time you say yes when your heart quietly says no, a small piece of you disappears. Every time you silence your feelings to avoid disappointing someone else, you send a message to yourself that your emotions don't matter. You become so busy proving your love to others that you forget to prove loyalty to yourself. And the cost of that is heavy. You begin to carry a quiet exhaustion, not the kind that rest can fix, but the kind that comes from living out of alignment with your truth. Maybe it started with small things. You stayed longer in conversations that drained you. You agreed to favors when you were already stretched thin. You gave second, third, fourth chances to people who never met you halfway. And after a while, that became your normal. You forgot what it felt like to choose peace over pleasing. You forgot that you are allowed to walk away from what hurts, even if you love it. What we often don't realize is that love without boundaries leads to burnout. The people you constantly show up for start to expect it, and before long, your giving becomes invisible. The more you sacrifice, the less they see your effort. And what hurts the most is not just their lack of appreciation, it's your realization that you taught them to treat you this way. You made your absence so unthinkable that your presence became taken for granted. And when you finally sit with yourself, really sit, you notice the emptiness. The silence feels unfamiliar because you've spent so long filling it with everyone else's noise. You begin to realize that you've built your identity around being there for others, but not for yourself. You became the caretaker, the listener, the problem solver, everything to everyone, but nothing to yourself. And that realization cuts deep, because deep down, you know that no one asked you to give this much. You chose it because you believed it was the only way to be loved. But the truth is, the love that requires you to betray yourself isn't love at all. It's dependency disguised as devotion. The cost of always choosing others over yourself is not just emotional exhaustion. It's the slow erosion of your self-worth. You start believing that your value comes from what you offer, not from who you are. And that's when you lose the connection to your essence. There's a kind of heartbreak that comes not from losing someone else, but from realizing how much of yourself you've lost in the process of keeping them. And that's the real cost. The cost of choosing others so completely that you forget the one person you were meant to protect, you. When you finally understand that, you begin to see that love should never require you to disappear. There comes a moment when the noise around you fades, and all that's left is the sound of your own truth whispering beneath the surface. A truth you've ignored for far too long. It's not a loud realization. It's quiet, almost fragile, like a soft ache in the chest that refuses to go away. You start to see patterns that were always there. You notice how often you've said, "I'm fine," when you weren't. You replay the times you stayed in situations that drained you, hoping things would change, and they never did. You look at yourself and realize that somewhere between trying to keep everything together and being everything for everyone, you slowly fell apart. The moment you realize you've been losing yourself doesn't usually come in one dramatic scene. It creeps in the silence after an argument, in the loneliness you feel even when you're surrounded by people, in that sudden thought that you don't recognize who you are anymore. You catch yourself doing things that don't align with your heart, speaking words that don't sound like your own, and it hits you that you've been playing a role, one that keeps everyone comfortable except you. You might remember who you were before life asked you to shrink, the version of you that laughed freely, dreamed without limits, loved without fear. And now, that version feels distant, like someone you used to know. You wonder how it happened, how you became so afraid to disappoint others that you started disappointing yourself instead. You think back to the moments when you felt the pull to walk away, but stayed. When you wanted to say no, but said yes. When you felt small, but pretended you were okay. Each of those moments, tiny as they seemed, chipped away at the connection between you and your truth. It's a painful realization because it doesn't just expose others' actions. It forces you to face your own. You see how often you silenced your instincts, how you made excuses for people who hurt you, how you convinced yourself that being loved meant being needed, even if that meant losing your peace. It hurts because you realize you were the one holding the door open for your own unhappiness, all in the name of love, loyalty, or fear of being alone. But within that pain lies awakening, that whisper inside you, the one saying, "You can't keep doing this." Isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's your heart's way of reminding you that you deserve to exist in your own life, not just in the background of someone else's story. That voice grows louder the longer you ignore it, and eventually, you can't escape it anymore. It's the moment when your reflection stops lying for you. When you reach that breaking point, it's not the end of you. It's the beginning. It's the moment you start to peel back the layers of who you've become and remember who you are. You start asking hard questions. What do I want? What do I need? What makes me feel alive? And the answers may come slowly, but they will come. Because beneath all the exhaustion, beneath the roles and expectations, the real you has been waiting, patient, quiet, but unbroken. Realizing you've been losing yourself is both devastating and liberating. It hurts to admit how far you've drifted, but it's also the first step toward coming home. That moment of clarity, as painful as it feels, is your invitation to begin again, to rebuild, to choose differently. And from that moment forward, you are no longer asleep in your own life. You are awake. There's a belief many of us grow up with that choosing yourself means you're selfish, that if you put your needs first, you're abandoning others. So we learn to shrink, to please, to keep peace at the cost of our own. We tell ourselves that if we love deeply enough, tolerate long enough, and give endlessly, somehow life will reward us with happiness. But there comes a point where you start to see that self-sacrifice isn't love, it's slow self-destruction. You realize that you can't keep pouring from an empty cup and expect to feel whole. Choosing yourself isn't a betrayal of others, it's a promise to yourself, one that says, "I will no longer abandon me." When you finally make that choice, it feels uncomfortable at first. You've spent years defining love as endurance, and suddenly, you're redefining it as balance. It's confusing, even painful. You may start setting boundaries and notice the silence that follows. Some people who are comfortable with your giving may resist your growth. They'll say you've changed, and they're right, you have. Because you've learned that love built on your constant self-denial isn't love at all, it's dependence. You've learned that you can't keep breaking yourself into smaller pieces just so others can feel whole. Choosing yourself isn't about walking away from everyone. It's about walking toward your truth. It's about recognizing that you deserve the same energy, patience, and compassion that you give so freely to others. You begin to understand that it's not selfish to rest, to say no, to want more. It's not cold to protect your peace. It's not rude to refuse to be someone's emotional crutch. For so long, you've been taught to equate self-worth with selflessness, but the two are not the same. You can care for others deeply and still not destroy yourself doing it. This choice, this moment where you say, I matter too, changes everything. You start to notice that the relationships which once drained you begin to lose their hold. The people who truly love you respect your boundaries. They don't punish you for them. You realize that love should never demand that you disappear. True love doesn't fear your independence, it celebrates it. When you choose yourself, you begin to attract connections built on mutual respect instead of imbalance. But before the peace comes the storm. Choosing yourself requires courage. It means confronting guilt, that deep, aching guilt that whispers, you're letting people down. You have to face the discomfort of being misunderstood, of not being liked by everyone anymore. You have to stand strong when old habits beg you to fall back into patterns of over-giving. But something magical happens when you hold your ground. Your inner voice grows louder. That small whisper that used to be drowned out by everyone else's needs becomes a roar. And with every no that honors your peace, with every boundary that protects your energy, you rebuild your confidence piece by piece. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you start loving them from a place of fullness, not emptiness. It means you stop trying to earn love and start realizing you already deserve it. The world around you might resist your transformation, but the world within you will finally feel like home. You stop chasing approval. You stop seeking validation. You start living aligned with what feels true. And in that alignment, you find power, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that frees you. Because when you finally choose yourself, you don't just change your life. You change the way you love, the way you live, and the way you see your own worth. When you finally begin to choose yourself, the first thing you expect is relief, a sense of peace, a wave of clarity that makes everything fall into place. But what comes first isn't peace. It's loneliness, it's silence, it's the strange emptiness that fills the spaces where people once stood, where noise once kept you distracted from your own heart. You realize that when you start honoring your truth, not everyone will clap for you. Some will distance themselves, some will question you, and some will quietly disappear. It's painful, because these are often the people you thought would always understand. But in the silence that follows, you learn something powerful. Sometimes peace sounds like loneliness at first. You start to see how much of your life was built around keeping others comfortable. You notice the friendships that only existed when you were the one giving. You see the relationships that thrived on your silence, not your voice. And now, when you no longer play the same role, you feel the shift, the awkward tension, the distance, the quiet withdrawal. It's easy to mistake this for rejection, to think that maybe you did something wrong. But this loneliness isn't punishment, it's transition. It's what happens when you step out of a life that wasn't meant for your fullest self. The hardest part of choosing yourself isn't the choice itself, it's staying with that choice when the world feels empty afterward. It's sitting in your room, feeling the ache of lost connections and reminding yourself that peace is worth more than people who only love you when you're convenient. It's battling the part of you that wants to run back to the familiar just to feel something again. Because even when that old version of life was painful, it was predictable. You knew how to survive in it. But now you're stepping into the unknown, and that takes courage. There will be nights where the silence feels too loud, where the tears come without warning, where you question if choosing yourself was even the right thing. You'll replay memories of laughter, moments of closeness, and wonder why things had to change. But here's the truth. They didn't change because you became cold. They changed because you became honest. The people who were meant to walk with you won't be threatened by your growth. They'll be inspired by it. The ones who fall away were only meant to teach you what it feels like to give too much of yourself. That period of loneliness is a sacred space. It's where you meet yourself again without distractions, without pretending. It's where you begin to hear your own voice clearly for the first time in years. You start learning what you actually enjoy, what truly matters to you, what peace feels like when it's not dependent on someone else's presence. You begin to rebuild from the inside out. You realize that being alone doesn't mean being abandoned. It means being available to yourself. And slowly, that loneliness begins to transform. It turns into solitude, a quiet strength, a soft confidence. You find that you don't crave validation the way you used to. You stop chasing people who don't choose you back. You start finding comfort in your own company. The silence that once felt suffocating begins to feel sacred. You start to see that this emptiness isn't a void, it's space. Space for new beginnings, for new energy, for people who love the real you, not the version you performed. So yes, the loneliness before the light is real. It hurts, it tests you, it tempts you to go back. But if you can hold on through that season, if you can let yourself sit in the quiet without running, you'll find something far more beautiful on the other side. Peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on someone else staying, but the unshakable peace that comes from finally staying true to yourself. When you finally choose yourself, life begins to shift in ways you never imagined. It's not that everything suddenly becomes easy. It's that you start living in truth instead of fear. You no longer wake up wondering who you need to please or what version of yourself you need to be today. You simply start showing up as you. And that changes everything. You begin to feel a quiet kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from no longer chasing love, attention, or approval. You stop running after people who can't meet you halfway because you've learned to meet yourself fully. You no longer wait for someone to validate your worth. You know your worth in silence. The desperate energy that once made you cling now transforms into calm confidence. You realize that love, peace, and happiness were never things you had to earn. They were things you had to allow. When you choose yourself, the world doesn't magically fix itself, but you do. You start making decisions from strength instead of fear. You stop settling for almost love and half-hearted effort. You stop saying yes to what breaks your spirit. And in doing so, you create space for things that truly align with who you are becoming. That space feels scary at first because it's unfamiliar, but it's sacred. It's where new blessings begin to grow. People will notice the change in you. Some will be drawn to your peace, others will be threatened by it. But you'll stop needing to explain yourself. You'll understand that the people meant for you will feel at home in your truth, not intimidated by it. You'll attract relationships built on respect instead of rescue, connection instead of control. Choosing yourself gives you back your power, not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that anchors you. It's the power to walk away from what no longer serves you, the power to say no without guilt, the power to love without losing yourself. You realize that everything you thought you needed from others was always within you. That's the freedom and power that follow. You stop surviving and start living. You stop begging to be chosen because you already chose yourself. And from that moment, everything, your peace, your energy, your life, begins to change. Choosing yourself isn't about becoming harder. It's about becoming whole. It's about remembering that you were never meant to live your life in pieces, constantly giving fragments of yourself away just to feel worthy. You were meant to stand in your truth, to speak from your heart, and to walk through this world knowing that your value isn't dependent on who stays or who sees it. When you finally choose yourself, you begin to live from a deeper place, a place where peace matters more than approval, where love begins within, and where happiness is no longer something you chase, but something you create. You stop searching for someone to complete you because you realize you were never incomplete. And yes, it takes courage. It takes walking away from what's familiar, from people who don't understand your growth, from patterns that once felt like home. But what waits on the other side of that courage is something you can't get from anyone else. The unshakable peace that comes from belonging fully to yourself. So if you've been giving too much, loving too hard, or losing yourself in the process of being there for others, Let this be your reminder. Your life changes the moment you choose you, not because the world suddenly becomes kind, but because you finally are. Everything, your confidence, your energy, your relationships, your peace, begins to align when you stop abandoning yourself. Because when you finally choose